Katie Morgan walked into her quarters after a long day of testing new shield designs at the military base on New Haven Colony, and she was covered in grease and metal dust from head to toe because the prototype had exploded 3 times during the afternoon trials. But she had finally figured out how to make the quantum displacement field stable enough for combat use, which was a major breakthrough that could change everything for human defense forces in this sector of space. The quarters were supposed to be empty because her previous roommate had transferred to another colony 2 weeks ago. But when Katie pushed open the door with her shoulder while carrying a heavy toolbox filled with spare parts and diagnostic equipment, she found someone else already living in the small space that was meant to house military personnel during their assignments on this remote border. Whirled standing in the middle of the room was the most beautiful and strange woman Katie had ever seen in her entire life, with silver hair that seemed to glow in the dim lighting of the quarters, pointed ears that swept back from her head in an elegant curve, and eyes that shimmered like liquid mercury, reflecting light in ways that human eyes simply could not match, no matter how advanced their genetic modifications became over the centuries. The woman wore flowing robes that seemed to be made from material that shifted colors as she moved, and perched on her shoulder was a creature that made Katie drop her toolbox in shock and surprise because it was clearly a dragon, albeit a small one about the size of a large cat, with crimson scales that gleamed like polished rubies and eyes that burned with an inner fire that suggested vast intelligence behind that reptilian gaze. Katie stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak or move, while the alien woman turned to face her with an expression of polite curiosity mixed with something that might have been nervousness or uncertainty about this unexpected meeting between 2 very different species who had only recently made first contact through official diplomatic channels. The dragon, which Katie would later learn was named Ember, tilted its head and made a soft, chirping sound that seemed oddly musical and pleasant, despite coming from a creature that humans had only ever encountered in myths and legends from ancient Earth. The alien woman smiled and opened her mouth to introduce herself, but then her eyes fell on the toolbox that Katie had dropped, and specifically on the device that had rolled out onto the floor, a small cylindrical object that was clearly a quantum phase modulator of a design that should not exist according to all galactic records of human technological development. For a long moment, the alien woman just stared at the device, her silver eyes growing wider and wider as she processed what she was seeing, and then without any warning at all, her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed onto the floor in a dead faint, hitting the ground with a soft thump that startled both Katie and the dragon equally. The dragon immediately leaped from its perch and landed on the fallen woman, making distressed chirping sounds while projecting waves of confused mental images directly into Katie's brain, which was an extremely strange sensation that felt like someone was putting pictures directly into her thoughts without using words or sounds. Katie rushed forward and knelt beside the unconscious alien, checking her pulse and breathing to make sure she was all right, while the dragon paced back and forth on the woman's chest, clearly agitated and worried about its companion. After a few minutes, the alien woman began to stir, her eyelids fluttering as consciousness slowly returned to her elegant features. And when she finally opened her eyes fully, she looked up at Katie with an expression of absolute terror, mixed with fascination and disbelief. Katie helped her sit up and offered her a glass of water from the dispenser on the wall, and the alien woman accepted it gratefully, drinking deeply before finally speaking in perfect English with only the slightest accent that suggested she had learned the language from recordings rather than native speakers. Her name was Silvara, she explained in a shaky voice, and she was an observer for the Etherian Empire, assigned to New Haven Colony to monitor human activity and report back to her superiors about this newly contacted species that had only joined the galactic community within the last decade. She apologized profusely for fainting, which she said was extremely embarrassing for someone of her rank and training, but she simply could not help her reaction when she saw the quantum phase modulator lying on the floor, because according to all the intelligence reports and scientific assessments that the Etherian Empire had compiled, humans were supposed to be barely capable of basic fusion drives and primitive energy shields. The device on the floor was technology that the Etherian Empire itself had only developed within the last century, after thousands of years of research and advancement. And yet here was a human engineer casually carrying it around in a toolbox alongside common wrenches and screwdrivers as if it were no more remarkable than a standard power cell. Katie tried to explain that human technological development had progressed much faster than anyone expected, partly due to humanity's unique approach to problem-solving and partly due to some lucky discoveries in abandoned alien ruins on the outer colonies, but Silvara was clearly having difficulty processing this information. The dragon, Ember, kept projecting confused mental images to both women, showing pictures of primitive human spacecraft next to the advanced quantum modulator, as if trying to reconcile two contradictory pieces of information that simply did not fit together in any logical framework. As the evening wore on and the initial shock began to fade, Katie and Silvara found themselves talking more easily, sharing stories about their respective cultures and backgrounds, while Ember curled up between them and occasionally contributed her own telepathic commentary on the conversation. Silvara explained that dragons were considered sacred companions in Etherian culture, bonded to specific individuals from birth and serving as partners, protectors, and advisors throughout their lives, and that Ember had been with her since she was a child growing up on the crystal cities of the Etherian homeworld. Katie talked about growing up on Earth and joining the military engineering corps because she loved solving impossible problems and creating new technologies that could protect humanity from the dangers of a galaxy that was far more hostile and complex than anyone had imagined when humans first achieved faster-than-light travel. But beneath the friendly conversation, both women knew that this accidental encounter had changed something fundamental, because Silvara now possessed knowledge about human capabilities that her superiors did not have. And she would soon face a difficult choice about what to do with that information. The dragon seemed to sense the tension in the air and made soft cooing sounds that were clearly meant to be comforting, while projecting images of the two women standing together against some unseen threat, as if Ember could somehow see possibilities that neither Katie nor Silvara could yet imagine. 3 days after the incident in the quarters, strange things began happening around New Haven Colony that made both Katie and Silvara increasingly nervous about the security situation in their sector of spaceships that were scheduled to arrive at the colony never appeared. And when search and rescue teams went looking for them, they found only debris fields and scattered wreckage that suggested violent attacks rather than mechanical failures or navigation errors. Commander Lisa Hayes called an emergency meeting of all senior officers and their technical staff, which meant Katie had to attend despite her relatively junior rank, because her expertise with advanced defensive systems was becoming increasingly valuable as the security situation deteriorated. During the briefing, Lisa showed surveillance data that had been collected by automated sensors scattered throughout the border regions, and the patterns were disturbing to anyone who understood military strategy and the movement of hostile forces in preparation for major offensive operations. Someone or something was systematically eliminating human ships and destroying the sensor networks that allowed New Haven to monitor the surrounding space, which was classic preparation for an invasion or major assault on the colony itself. Lisa explained that human intelligence networks had identified the threat as coming from an organization called the Void Syndicate, a coalition of alien species who believed that emerging civilizations should be destroyed before they could become powerful enough to challenge the established galactic order. The Syndicate had apparently obtained surveillance footage showing Katie working with advanced human technology, and they had decided that humanity represented an unacceptable threat that needed to be eliminated immediately before humans could fully develop their potential. Katie felt sick to her stomach as Lisa showed the footage because she recognized the angle and timing of the recording, which meant someone had placed hidden cameras in her quarters specifically to monitor her activities. Silvara was also at the meeting, representing the Etherean Empire's observer mission on New Haven, and Katie could see the conflict playing across her alien features as she processed the information being presented. After the briefing ended, Silvara pulled Katie aside and admitted that she had received new orders from her superiors, instructing her to gather all possible information about human technology and return to Etherean space immediately so that the Empire could decide how to respond to this unexpected development. The Etherean government was debating whether to offer humanity protection against the Void Syndicate or to join the Syndicate in eliminating the human threat before it could grow stronger, and Silvara's report would likely influence that decision in ways that could determine the fate of billions of people. Katie asked if Silvara planned to follow those orders, and the alien woman hesitated for a long moment before admitting that she honestly did not know what she should do, because her duty to the Empire was clear. But her growing friendship with Katie made the choice far more difficult than it should have been. Ember projected images of the two women standing back to back, facing threats from all directions, and then shifted to show them separated and alone, as if the dragon was trying to illustrate the consequences of different choices. The tension escalated dramatically when Captain Megan Torres, commander of the Human Defense Fleet stationed at New Haven, intercepted a Void Syndicate scouting force near the outer system boundary and engaged them in a brief but intense battle. The human ships were outnumbered, but managed to destroy 2 enemy vessels before the rest of the Syndicate force retreated, and when Torres analyzed the wreckage, she made a disturbing discovery that changed everything. The weapons used by the Syndicate ships were of Etherean design and manufacture, which suggested that at least some factions within the Etherean Empire had already decided to support the Syndicate rather than remain neutral or help humanity. When Katie confronted Silvara with this evidence, the alien woman looked genuinely shocked and horrified, insisting that she had no knowledge of any such arrangement and that her government must be deeply divided on the question of how to handle the human situation. But the damage was done, and trust between humans and Ethereans on New Haven Colony began to break down rapidly as fear and suspicion spread through both communities. Katie found herself caught between her duty to humanity and her friendship with Silvara, while the alien woman struggled with her loyalty to the Empire and her growing conviction that the Syndicate was wrong to target humanity for elimination. Ember became increasingly agitated as the crisis deepened, and the dragon began displaying abilities that neither Katie nor Silvara had seen before, such as creating small rifts in space that allowed her to move instantly from one location to another. One evening, as Katie and Silvara sat together in their quarters, trying to figure out what to do, Ember suddenly projected a series of images that were far more complex and detailed than her usual simple mental pictures. The dragon showed them visions of an ancient race that had seeded life across the galaxy millions of years ago, creating various species, including both dragons and something that looked remarkably like humans. Then Ember showed them a hidden location somewhere in an uncharted nebula, and a sense of urgency accompanied the images, as if the dragon was trying to tell them that whatever was hidden there could help them survive the coming storm. Katie and Silvara exchanged glances, realizing that Ember was offering them a possible solution to their impossible situation, but it would require them to trust each other completely and to defy both human and Etherean authorities. The question was whether they had the courage to take that leap of faith when the consequences of failure could be catastrophic for everyone they cared about. Silvara made her decision during a tense confrontation with her Etherean superiors via quantum communication link. And when the transmission ended, she looked at Katie with a mixture of determination and sadness, that spoke volumes about the personal cost of the choice she had just made. She had refused the direct order to return to Etherian space with intelligence about human technology, and instead she had informed her superiors that she would be staying on New Haven to help humanity defend itself against the Void Syndicate. The response was immediate and harsh, as Silvera's family was placed under house arrest back on the Etherian homeworld, her military honors were stripped away, and she was officially branded a traitor to the Empire. Katie felt terrible about the sacrifices Silvera was making, but the alien woman insisted that it was the right choice, because she had come to believe that humanity deserved a chance to prove themselves rather than being eliminated out of fear. Ember seemed pleased with Silvera's decision and projected images of approval and support, while also continuing to share her strange visions of the ancient location hidden in the nebula. Colonel Amy Roberts, who led the Human Xenobiology Research Division at New Haven, became very interested in Ember's visions and asked if she could study the dragon more closely to understand what was triggering these ancestral memories. Through careful analysis of Ember's genetic structure and comparison with human DNA samples, Amy made a shocking discovery that changed everything they thought they knew about humanity's origins. Humans carried genetic markers that did not match any natural evolutionary pattern found on Earth. And when Amy compared these anomalous sequences with samples from dragon DNA, she found remarkable similarities that suggested both species had been modified by the same ancient source. This meant that humanity's rapid technological advancement was not just good luck or clever engineering, but rather a form of genetic memory awakening as humans encountered the challenges of galactic civilization. The ancient progenitor race that had seeded life across the galaxy had apparently given certain species the potential to develop advanced technologies instinctively, and humans were one of those chosen species, along with dragons and possibly others. This revelation terrified the galactic community because the progenitor race was legendary for creating weapons and technologies so advanced that they seemed like magic to younger civilizations. If humans could access that same knowledge, even partially, they would become one of the most powerful species in the galaxy within a single generation. The Void Syndicate accelerated their plans when they learned about this discovery, and Silvera intercepted communications showing that a massive fleet was being assembled to attack New Haven before humans could fully awaken their latent potential. Time was running out, and Katie knew they had to act quickly if they wanted any chance of survival. She proposed a desperate plan to Lisa Hayes and the other senior officers, suggesting that a small team should follow Ember's guidance to the hidden location in the nebula. Hoping to find something there that could help them defend against the coming invasion, General Patricia Cole, the highest-ranking human officer in the sector, authorized the mission despite the risks, because they simply had no other options that offered any realistic chance of success. Katie, Silvera, and Ember were joined by Lieutenant Amber Chen, a skilled pilot who volunteered for the mission despite knowing how dangerous it would be. They took a small, fast ship equipped with the best stealth systems human engineers could design, and they slipped away from New Haven just hours before the Syndicate scouts arrived in the system. The journey to the nebula took 3 days of constant tension, as they had to avoid multiple Syndicate patrol routes while following Ember's increasingly specific mental directions toward their destination. When they finally arrived at the coordinates Ember had shown them, they found a massive structure hidden within the swirling gases of the nebula, protected by energy fields that would have torn apart any ship that did not carry the right genetic signatures. Ember's presence allowed them to pass through the shield safely, and they docked at an ancient facility that had been waiting in silence for millions of years. Inside, they found a vast database containing the history of the progenitor race and detailed explanations of why they had disappeared from the galaxy. The progenitors had not died or been destroyed, but rather had evolved beyond physical form, ascending to a higher plane of existence that younger species could not yet comprehend. Before they left, The progenitors had seeded various species across the galaxy with genetic potential, hoping that their children would eventually follow a similar path of growth and transcendence, but they had also left behind defensive systems and weapons, carefully locked away so that only their genetic descendants could access them. And only in times of desperate need, when extinction threatened, Katie realized that this was exactly such a time. And with Ember's help, she began activating the ancient systems and downloading technical data that would allow human engineers to create hybrid technologies combining progenitor knowledge with human innovation. But the process took time, and while they worked frantically to gather everything they could, the Void Syndicate launched their attack on New Haven, beginning a battle that would determine the fate of humanity. Back on the colony, Lisa Hayes and Megan Torres prepared their forces for the fight of their lives, knowing they had to hold out long enough for Katie's team to return with whatever help they might have found. The war had begun, and there was no turning back now for anyone involved in the conflict. The Battle of New Haven started with a massive bombardment from orbit as Syndicate warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and immediately opened fire on the colony's defensive platforms. Major Rebecca Stone commanded the defense fleet, and she knew from the first moment that her forces were hopelessly outnumbered, facing at least 10 enemy ships for every human vessel she could put into the fight. But Rebecca also knew that surrender was not an option, because the Syndicate had made it clear they planned to completely eliminate humanity rather than accept any kind of peaceful coexistence. The human defenders fought with desperate courage, using every trick and tactic they had learned during their brief time as a spacefaring species, but the Syndicate forces had centuries of combat experience and technological advantages that were difficult to overcome. Down on the colony's surface, Lisa Hayes organized evacuation of civilians to underground shelters while preparing defensive positions to resist any landing forces that might break through the orbital defenses. Meanwhile, Katie's team was racing back from the nebula with the progenitor technology loaded into their ship's databanks, but they were still hours away from New Haven and unable to help with the initial defense. Silvara insisted on taking Ember directly into combat despite the danger, because the dragon's awakened powers might make the difference between victory and defeat. When they arrived at the battle zone, Ember revealed abilities that shocked everyone who witnessed them, breathing plasma that could warp space itself and tear through enemy shields like they were made of paper. The dragon's telepathic powers also allowed her to coordinate human fighters with unprecedented precision, sharing tactical information instantly across the entire defense fleet and allowing Rebecca's forces to fight as a perfectly synchronized unit. Silvara piloted a small fighter craft with Ember perched beside her, and together they struck at enemy capital ships with devastating effectiveness, destroying weapons emplacements and shield generators that would have taken entire squadrons of human ships to eliminate. But even with Ember's help, the battle was going badly for the defenders, as Syndicate reinforcements kept arriving and overwhelming human positions through sheer weight of numbers. The turning point came when traitor Dr. Helen Clark attempted to sabotage the colony's main power reactor, which would have disabled all defensive systems and left New Haven completely vulnerable to attack. Lieutenant Diana Ross caught Helen in the act and arrested her after a brief struggle. But the damage was already done, as several key systems were offline and would take precious time to repair. Helen had been feeding information to the Syndicate for months, believing that humanity would ultimately destroy itself and take other species down with them if allowed to develop freely. She thought she was preventing future catastrophe by helping eliminate humanity now, but all she had really done was betray everyone who trusted her. As the battle raged on, Katie's ship finally arrived at New Haven and immediately began broadcasting the progenitor technical data to every human vessel and facility in the system. Engineers on the ships and at ground installations worked frantically to implement the new designs, creating hybrid weapons and defensive systems that combined ancient technology with human innovation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. as human ships that had been barely holding their own suddenly began pushing back against Syndicate forces with weapons that could match or exceed anything the enemy possessed. Katie herself took control of the colony's main defensive array and used progenitor technology to create adaptive shields that learned from enemy weapons and adjusted their frequencies automatically to block incoming fire. She also implemented quantum communication systems that made human tactical coordination impossible to jam or intercept, giving Rebecca's fleet a crucial advantage in the chaotic environment of space combat. But the Syndicate was not finished yet, and they threw everything they had at New Haven in a final desperate attempt to break through the defenses before human technology could be fully upgraded. The fighting reached a peak of intensity that neither side could sustain for long, and casualties mounted on both sides as ships were destroyed and defensive positions were overrun. Then something happened that changed everything and shifted the balance of power in ways that no one had predicted. A massive fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, and for a terrible moment, everyone thought that Syndicate reinforcements had arrived to finish off the battered human defenders. But these were not Syndicate ships, they were Etherian vessels flying the banners of the Empire's main fleet. And they took up positions that could allow them to strike at either the humans or the Syndicate forces. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see which side the Etherians would choose in this critical moment. Silvara did something that no one expected, and that would later be remembered as one of the most important moments in galactic history, because instead of waiting to see what the Etherian fleet would do, she took control of the situation in a way that was both brilliant and absolutely hilarious. She broadcast the original surveillance footage of herself fainting when she saw Katie's technology, but she added her own commentary, explaining, in excruciating and embarrassing detail, how the mighty Etherian Empire had been so blinded by their own arrogance that their trained military observer literally lost consciousness when confronted with evidence that humans were more advanced than expected. The broadcast went out on all frequencies and was picked up by every ship in the system, both human and alien, and within minutes it was being relayed across the entire galactic communication network. Silvara explained that the galaxy's fear of humanity was based on the same stupid arrogance that had made her faint. The assumption that younger species must be either primitive or dangerous, never potentially equal or even superior in unexpected ways. She argued passionately that humanity deserved a chance to prove themselves rather than being destroyed out of fear, and she pointed out that the Etherian Empire's greatest strength had always been their willingness to learn from others rather than blindly attacking anything they did not understand. The message was powerful, partly because it was true, and partly because Silvara's willingness to humiliate herself publicly for the sake of peace showed a level of courage and conviction that commanded respect. Commander Lauren White, who led the newly arrived Etherian fleet, was Silvara's aunt and a reformist who had been looking for an excuse to break away from the hardline factions in the Empire that wanted to join the Syndicate. The broadcast gave Lauren the political cover she needed to make her move, and she immediately announced that the Etherian fleet would side with humanity against the Syndicate forces. The combined human and Etherian counteroffensive broke the Syndicate invasion within hours, as enemy ships found themselves caught between two powerful forces and unable to coordinate their defense. Ember played a crucial role in the final phase of the battle, using her ability to open temporary portals through space to allow human reinforcements to arrive instantly at critical points in the fighting. The Dragon created a massive gateway that brought 3 full squadrons of human ships directly into the heart of the Syndicate formation, surrounding the enemy fleet and cutting off any possibility of retreat. The Syndicate commander surrendered rather than see his entire force destroyed, and the war ended with humanity not only surviving, but emerging as a major power in the galactic community. In the aftermath of the battle, Katie and Silvara's unlikely friendship became the foundation for a new alliance between humans and Etherians. The footage of Silvara fainting became a cultural touchstone across the galaxy. A humorous reminder that first impressions are often completely wrong and that arrogance blinds people to truth. Ember became an ambassador between species, traveling with Silvara and Katie to various worlds and helping them build bridges between different cultures. Katie was promoted to Major and given command of a joint human and Etherian technology research division, where she continued to develop new systems that combined the best ideas from multiple species. Silvara received pardons for herself and her family from the reformist faction that now controlled the Etherian government, and she became the first non-human to receive full human military honors for her service during the war. Together, with Ember curled up between them in their shared quarters on a new space station that served as headquarters for the Alliance, they planned for a future where the galaxy judged species by their character rather than their age or appearance. The story spread across countless worlds about how one alien woman chose friendship over duty, how one human engineer proved that innovation matters more than tradition, and how one dragon helped save billions of lives by awakening ancient memories at exactly the right moment. And whenever new species arrived to join the galactic community, there was always someone ready to share the video of Silvara fainting, not to mock her, but to remind everyone that the unknown should be greeted with curiosity and hope rather than fear and violence. Years later, when another new species arrived at the Alliance headquarters and their diplomat fainted upon seeing some particularly impressive piece of human technology, Katie and Silvara just looked at each other and started laughing. Ember projected mental images showing dozens of similar reactions from different species, suggesting that this might become a running theme in galactic relations. The hilarious reaction that had started everything had become a symbol of hope, proving that the galaxy was full of surprises and that the best response to the unknown was not fear or violence, but openness and friendship. Humanity had proven their worth not through superior firepower or advanced technology alone, but through their ability to forge genuine connections across impossible divides, and to inspire others to be better than their fears would allow. The war had been won not just by weapons and tactics, but by one simple choice to trust a stranger and to believe that friendship could overcome even the deepest divisions.